I once had a job where I had to answer the phone and say, "Hello, beef?"
There we are, Lee's team. What do you think?
What was the job?
It was a job, it was an office job where,
An office job?
Yeah, an office job.
Right.
In an office job.
Yeah, I know what an office job is.
Yeah, with a certain
the word
type...
office I'm not confused with. It's the bit about the beef that's getting to.
It's a government department where we dealt with beef and lamb and suckling cows.
Right. So what was the government department exactly? What were they doing?
It was an agricultural department of Welsh government.
So they'd ring up and say, "Hello, beef," and the kind of questions they would ask you would be...
They'd say, well, it was all about identifying animals.
Identifying them?
Yeah.
So you go, "Hello, beef," and they go, "I think you're just the man. I'm looking at a big black and white animal. It's saying moo. Can you help me?" "Ah, it's cow. I'm beef. Goodbye."
No. Well, either that or you might want to put them through the suckler cow. Depends if it was male or female.
What is a suckler cow?
I don't know. I only worked in beef.
Was this in Cardiff or something? Or?
No, it was in West Wales.
Was it in Carmarthen?
Carmarthen.
Kidwelly?
Carmarthen.
Haverfordwest?
Carmarthen.
Carmarthen?
You should work on the trains. The Welsh office is in Cardiff, but the Welsh Office Agriculture Department, WOAD, is in Carmarthen.
So farmers would ring you up and ask you questions about
Farmers
beef?
would ring me up and they'd say, "I've got an animal here, and it needs identification," and we would give them...
What do you mean identification?
We would give them cattle identification documents. It was the CID department, CID,
Just
cattle identification.
Stop it. I feel sick with confusion.
I worked in CID. It was...
Oh, you worked in CID?
Cattle
now it makes sense. You worked for CID.
There's been a mooder.
CID was cattle identification document, so it's like a cow passport, and they'd ask us questions about
Cow passport?
A cow passport. They'd ring up and they'd say, "We've got a new cow in town."
So you'd send out the official documentation.
They would tell me the animal's details, and we would print up a CID, cattle identification document.
Because each one needed this. Everyone had to have this.
Every cow.
Oh, every cow, yes.
So what are you going to say then, Lee? Is he telling the truth?
Well, if you know a lot about cows. A little.
I've rung up departments of DEFRA and said hello, and they've said hello, beef.
Yeah.
True. And the whole WOAD thing, you wouldn't just come up with that.
Unless you were very quick and very clever.
OK, we'll go with true.
He's saying true. Rod, were you telling the truth?
It was...
True!
Yes, it's true. Rod did once have a job where he had to ensure every cow had a passport. Oh, it's hard enough getting him into the milking shed, let alone a photo booth.
Thank you for the opportunity to present this little project that I've been working on thanks to the MLA R&D program. And I guess the takeaway message from that video, and part of the fun of being a researcher is you get to look at that sort of stuff, or try and find it, is sick with confusion. And I think from the general public's perspective that's probably very much the case, but for people associated with the live export industry, identification might make you sick, but it won't make you sick from confusion. It will make you sick from the compliance and the process of doing so. So this project's all about reviewing S-gas identification and traceability, and we've heard already that there are some really good systems out there. There. So, and we know that that compliance with S-gas, robust identification and traceability, they're absolutely crucial to providing and underpinning the integrity of the animal welfare benefits that are associated with the S-gas program. We also know that an inability to maintain that traceability undermines S-gas, and that permanent identification is required to ensure that animals that are removed from the supply chain can be identified, but more importantly, that you can continue to identify the animals that are in your supply chain, and there's some real benefits from doing that. So the process started with a desktop review. We have 30 different documents cited in our research document, but there are many more commercial documents and information brochures from commercial companies, anecdotal evidence that we looked at to distill down into what currently is best practice and what's likely to be best practice for identification going forward. We looked at what's happening in New Zealand. We also looked at what's happening in the USA, Europe, South America, and a number of other countries that have adapted significant animal identification projects that are quite minor in terms of the number of animals that they're tracking, but have significant benefits from doing so. And that's so Malaysia is one country that's instigated a program in Botswana where they only track animals using rumen boluses because that was the only way that they could provide integrity on their traceability program for access to the European Union. We also had a look at what new developments, what's on the horizon, what's coming in terms of ID and identification of animals and the methods that were being used. And we also had a look at the tracking and traceability and identification methods that are being used in industries that are completely different to livestock. You know, that food integrity system is, food safety and integrity is important, but there are a whole lot of other industries that use identification and traceability to track components in manufacturing industries. So we had a look to see if there was anything there that had relevant application, and there's some issues with converting some of those applications into food safe, use within the animal or food industries. So the findings and the benefits of traceability. So generally, we're looking for ownership, trade support, food safety, animal welfare, improved efficiency, and improved efficiency is the big add value or plus for this industry in terms of systems that are currently in use and already applied. It's a lost opportunity, or it has been a lost opportunity in some cases, and I'll talk a little bit more on that as we go forward. So biosecurity, of course, and research. It protects the reputation. I guess a big part of the SCAS program is to protect the reputation and to continue to have the full support of the Australian public and the Australian regulators for a live export industry. And in the event you have a problem, particularly a biosecurity issue, it reduces losses and makes the management of those processes more efficient. Very importantly, the data accumulated through this process of monitoring animal identification and traceability can inform commercial decisions, research and extension. And it's interesting that the project you just saw, by monitoring and recording and using that information, you can make informed decisions rather than using what you've always thought to be the case and continuing to do what you've always done. And there is a huge incentive for industry to manage the identification and data for their own commercial benefit. The process should be that you do this because you actually get something out of it and it makes your business better and more competitive, rather than doing it because you have to do it and it's regulated. So our determination was the necessary attributes for good animal identification were a visual identification. You had to be able to see it. So a injectable RFID doesn't cut it. You don't know that it's been done, and if it's got a flag tag, well, the flag tag can be removed. It has to be visual. It has to be electronic, and that's because of the ease of management of recording and tracking, and because of the value add that the industry gains from that. And importantly, it needs to be permanent. It needs to be something that can't be removed. And if you think about the really efficient methods that we've got there now with NLIS tags or rumen boluses, most of these methods can be removed, and they are particularly removed when the animal's removed from the supply chain. So needed to be overcome in terms of this research. So what we determined also was that the combination of these assets, of these attributes, would be needed to form the most robust identification and to continue on through the traceability system. There's no single identification method that provides all three attributes. And that the emphasis on electronic capture can't be underestimated. The opportunity, the value add, the economy and efficiency that come through electronic capture and then the use of that data these days just has to be part of what this industry does. So we also, as I said, looked a little bit over the horizon to see what was happening in the future. So DNA sampling and retinal scanning will do and can do and do provide 100% certainty if you can avoid tampering. And I guess some of the sporting clubs that we've got around the country that are dealing with laboratory tampering could potentially be an influence that you'd have to deal with if you were dealing with DNA tests at a commercial level. But other than that, you've got an absolutely foolproof system. And that when you're looking at those technologies, they now come in very user-friendly, handheld field service units, even DNA. So retinal scanning, you might be aware of, is it's quite well used in some of the genetic and stud businesses. But DNA sampling now is down to a unit like you can see there. That is a DNA sequencing unit that plugs into a computer. Looks fantastic, but it's expensive, and it's expensive to use, and it doesn't have an application for this industry at this stage. And that is a typical optical scanning unit, and it basically captures an image of the back of the eye. It's very much of the blood vessels in the back of the eye, very much like a fingerprint, and that is absolutely 100% bulletproof in terms of identifying an animal. We also had a look at some of the other stuff that's out there that's used for identification, and the problem with microdots is they're micro and you can't see them. But the interesting part of microdots is that they're applied with a fluorescing adhesive, and that they are currently being used in Australia in New South Wales as a deterrent for livestock theft. So animals are having microdots painted onto their horns or in some cases their hooves, and that's a bit experimental at the moment. And they have a lifetime of on the horn glued on, absolutely permanent, and in the hoofs maybe up to 12 months. And as I say, you can't see the microdots, but you apply a UV light, the glue fluoresces, you know you've got something to look for, and that's a way of identifying animals. And I suspect that they may have some ability to be used as a deterrent, but also to monitor animals in suspect or leaky supply chains. So to give you an idea of the scope of what we looked at, we've used a scaling method so looking at all of what we thought were probable or likely methods of identification, and they've been graded into innate, applied, tags and electronic, and we've applied on the vertical scale a dollar figure based on what we thought would be the cost of not only the application or the purchase of the product, but also the application and the time and effort used to monitor or to read. And you can see you've got some really expensive units that are up towards the top of the chart. And as we go to the right, you'll see that we've got basically a grading as to the more points that each method achieved, the better it was. So the units that are on the far right, far left, your far right, lower corner, are the ones that are the cheapest, but also provide the best, highest score rating in terms of all of the attributes that we looked at. And the majority of those are the simplest. So, I mean, paint branding, for example, roller branding, a visual ear insert, microdots. And microdots, when I put that up, they look like it's expensive, high-tech stuff. The application of those on an animal is about something under 10 cents. So it's a really cheap way of providing some security about your stock. So if it's not used in this system, and you're worried about stock theft and a way of identifying your animals that's a bit bulletproof, it might have other applications, or for applications outside of the live export industry. So our preferences in considering all of that was that we need a combination, and that the essential and simple and easy component of that is, and for the cattle industry it's already very much in place, but it's not a requirement in SGAS for species other than cattle, is an RFID ear tag, with a highly visible, indelible mark on the animal. And our thoughts on that are that the most simple and cost-effective and easily applied process is a paint brand. And that could be differentiated by colour, by shape and by location on the animal to identify and export it to a consignment. And some work may need to be done to get a more permanent paint branding system than paint branding products than those that currently exist. But that area of technology is very well developed, and I'm sure that could be done. The other thought that we had was to move towards a roller brand type product, and will have seen or may have seen roller branding on carcasses, and I've got a photo in the following slide where you actually run a strip brand along a carcass or a part of the animal, and that strip brand could have a number of identifiers within it, colour, a design, and that could identify also, additional to the RFID tag, could identify the consignment and the exporter. And I'll go back to a word I used before. A very big part of what I see as being important in all of this is that you are creating deterrence for animals to move out of the supply chain, because they are so readily identified as being animals of Australian origin, shipped by that exporter in that consignment. And I think that is something that is really important that's come out of this process. The third concept we came up with was a visual ear insert, and if you walk up Mitchell Street, you'll see a few backpackers that have got big lugs in their ears. It's that sort of concept, that you could have an insert that's punched, but it's punched in a way that, and of a specific shape, that if it's removed, it's still identifiable that it had that mark in it in its first place. So it's much more sophisticated than an ear notch. And that the insert itself could be identified by numbers, by logos, by another method. So again, you can come back and say, for that export consign of an animal with that ear mark, with that ear insert, is clearly identifiable, and if the ear insert is removed, it's certainly an animal that came from Australia. So the combined methods, we believe, provide a very permanent and robust identification and significantly a deterrent to animals moving outside of the supply chain. So you can see there, you'll see carcasses with roller brands on them. It's not that clear a photograph, but there's certainly a lot of information in that branding, which identifies, in this case, a grading and a quality. And the ear insert, we've done a little bit of a stylised Australia there, but it could be any shape, and that's something that I think needs a little bit more work. So traceability. Australia's got a great system. NLIS for cattle is as good as we've seen anywhere in the world. There are many other systems that go back to sickening confusion because they run back to animal passports, and there are containers of passports in different places around the world that are being stored for animals that have been in different stages of process. Nobody really knows what to do with this. Having it on an electronic database that should be readily and easily accessed and easily uploaded is a fantastic system, and the NLI system is undoubtedly as good as you've got anywhere in the world. The lightweight handheld scanners, and I got Global Compliance, have got that their stuff out there, and I know that there are other systems. There's plenty of capacity to deal with this technology. We don't need to develop a new technology. We need to use it better, and it's great to see that some companies embracing using these very simple, quite old technologies now of RFID and DNA, but particularly RFID, and taking it to the next level, getting the most out of it. It's also our belief that the industry would be best served by taking the data that's being accumulated by exporters and/or importers or private commercial operators and building it into an industry-owned database once the animals leave Australia, and further traceability information is being brought back into a single system. There is a huge advantage in having a common warehouse for this data. If you get over the commercial issues about who owns it and who can access it and when, but if you can get that so that it can be used for the benefit of the industry in terms of logistics efficiency and research efficiency, it's been a missed opportunity, and it's an opportunity that we should be taking going forward, because a lot of what we're seeing in relation to SGAS is about compliance to a regulatory system. As I said earlier, we want to move away from that. There are a lot of components of the current SGAS system, a lot of operators within it that don't need any of this because they already have very good systems and they run their own systems anyway. This process is to ensure that there's integrity for all operators, but every operator within the system, from producer through to consumers in international markets, can benefit from the database and the warehousing of information and the intelligent use of that information in dealing with their product, or they're part of that supply chain and the product going forward. It's a great opportunity for the industry. So, where to next for this project? This is a pretty fresh off the blocks project. We put in our draft report last week, and it'll be completed by the end of the year once we get some feedback from our project managers and do some further review ourselves. So we'll put in our draft report's been submitted. We've got a final report due by the 30th of December. The program will make some presentations to industry. There will be some challenges with that. One of our recommendations absolutely will be that all animals have an RFID tag, and that's certainly not the case now for non-cattle exports or non-breeding exports. So the sheep and goat industries have got some challenges there based on these findings, but we believe that that's absolutely essential to have any credibility in managing export supply chains. And I think that there's a wealth of information that can be drawn from, particularly with sheep, and relative particularly to inanition, if you've got very common sensing points for feed and water consumption, which can come from the use of RFID technology. And that's it for us. Thanks, Mick.